In the mist-cloaked highlands where the Blue Nile gathers its first waters at Lake Tana, Ethiopia's leaders glimpsed a destiny waiting to be awakened. Long before the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam became a reality, surveyors and engineers mapped the river's course and dreamed of the turbines that might one day spin there. As early as the 1960s, under Emperor Haile Selassie, feasibility studies proposed hydropower sites on the Abe and Tekeze tributaries, only to be shelved under pressure from downstream capitals. Colonial-era agreements drafted in 1929 by Britain and Egypt guaranteed nearly all Nile waters to Egypt and Sudan, forbidding upstream storage without consent. A later accord in 1959 between Cairo and Khartoum deepened those allocations. Egypt secured 55.5 billion cubic meters per year, Sudan 18.5 billion, leaving Ethiopia home to over 80% of the Nile's flow, with no voice in its own river's future. Decades of political upheaval and economic hardship kept the dreams of dams at bay. The Derg's revolutionary focus in the 1970s prioritized land reform and famine relief. Irrigation projects on smaller rivers moved forward while Nile Basin ambitions languished. When Ethiopia joined the Nile Basin Initiative in 1999, alongside Egypt, Sudan, Uganda, and 5 others, a shared vision program spurred joint studies and workshops, but downstream partners refused funding for any project that might diminish their inherited shares. Hydrologists crunched data and built confidence through cooperation. Yet the specter of hydropolitical warfare kept lenders and contractors at a cautious distance. All of this changed in April 2011, when Prime Minister Meles Zenawi laid the first cornerstone on the rocky bluff overlooking the Blue Nile. His public declaration shattered decades of impasse. Ethiopia would harness its rivers for irrigation and electricity, in defiance of treaties signed without its consent. Bulldozers carved a cofferdam, diverting the river into temporary channels. Entire villages of stone huts were relocated to new towns with brick houses, fresh wells, and schools, tangible promises of the benefits that lay ahead. Clinics rose in places once served only by distant health posts. Roads were paved where dusty tracks had forced ambulant traders to rely on pack animals. The nation's engineers, many trained abroad, returned home to test designs in computer simulations, fed by 50 years of rainfall records and river gauge measurements. From the moment soil met concrete, the challenges loomed large. Seasonal. Torrents tested spillway models designed to survive once-in-a-century floods. Geologists drilled boreholes to confirm that the dam's foundation would hold under tens of millions of cubic meters of water. Diplomats braced for backlash. In Khartoum, officials warned that the Gezira irrigation scheme, once nourished by predictable flood pulses, faced altered timing and volumes. In Cairo, water ministry briefings spoke of food security risks for more than 90 million Egyptians, vulnerable to any drop in summer flows and to saltwater intrusion in the Nile Delta if freshwater pulses waned. Egypt and Sudan launched coordinated lobbying campaigns. Envoys carried binders of flow reduction projections to the African Union, the United Nations, and donor capitals from Washington to Brussels. They framed the dam as a threat to regional stability rather than a national development project, invoking international law and colonial-era accords. Sudan pressed the Security Council. Egypt reminded partners that decades-old treaties had guaranteed them nearly 100% of the river's waters. Their goal was to halt construction before the first turbine ever spun. Ethiopia answered with an unprecedented commitment to transparency. Technical committees were formed, bringing Egyptian and Sudanese experts to Addis Ababa to monitor water levels in real time. A phased filling schedule was negotiated. An initial modest rise timed to the rainy season, followed by gradual increments tied to downstream irrigation needs. Satellite imagery and river gauges, once symbols of surveillance, became tools of trust. Their data streamed live on shared dashboards. African Union mediators shuttled between meetings in Addis Ababa, Khartoum, and Cairo, brokering agreements over dinners under linen-draped tables. As the reservoir rose, nature wrote its own test. The newborn lake mirrored the highland skies, shifting from emerald to sapphire as light transformed its surface. Birds colonized newly flooded shorelines, while seasoned fishermen adapted ancient nets to new coves, discovering fish drawn by the submerged wood and reeds. Environmental scientists planted riparian buffers of reeds and grasses, filtering runoff and protecting breeding grounds in the Sud wetlands. Hydrologists monitored water quality parameters and installed early warning systems to guard lowland villages against flash floods. When the first turbines roared to life, the glow of electric lights flickered across rural towns. Children who once studied under oil lamps now did homework by steady bulbs. Health clinics that relied on solar panels gained reliable refrigeration for vaccines. Night shift workers found safe passage under streetlights. Entrepreneurs opened small workshops powered by hydropower, producing cement blocks, textiles, and farm machinery. Economists forecast that revenue from power exports would finance roads, hospitals, and schools across Oromia, Amhara, and beyond, fulfilling Meles Zenawi's promise to deliver visible progress to every region. Yet water diplomacy remained a living conversation. In dry seasons, when reservoir levels climbed, Egyptian ministers convened emergency sessions to verify that agreed minimum flows were upheld. Sudanese irrigation authorities pressed for precise release schedules, vital for planning planting and harvest cycles. Addis Ababa's technocrats refined hydrological models daily, balancing the twin mandates of power generation and downstream obligations. Climate change cast a long shadow. Erratic rains, unseasonal droughts, and extreme floods underlined the need for flexible governance frameworks. Engineers retrofitted additional spillway gates. Agronomists promoted drought-resistant crop varieties. Along the Gezira scheme, treaty clauses were adjusted to allow temporary waivers during severe weather events. Beyond the rooms of negotiators, civil society emerged as a powerful force for accountability. Women's cooperatives in resettlement areas formed oversight committees to monitor compensation funds, ensuring that displacement did not deepen gender inequality. Environmental NGOs lobbied for watershed reforestation, funding community nurseries that restored degraded uplands and reduced sedimentation rates. Legal scholars drafted a charter for a permanent Nile Basin Commission with binding dispute resolution mechanisms and the authority to coordinate joint infrastructure ventures on tributaries beyond the dam itself. Technological innovations complemented political progress. Floating solar arrays were installed on the reservoir's surface, boosting generation during sunny, low-flow months. Pumped storage experiments began, recycling water between upper and lower basins to smooth seasonal variability. Real-time sensor networks tracked water pressure, turbine efficiency, and seismic activity. Data shared across control rooms in Addis Ababa, Khartoum, and Cairo, embodying the very transparency that once seemed impossible. As dawn broke, fishermen cast their lines into glassy waters, reconnecting with rhythms older than the dam's first pillar. Farmers planted rice on receding floodplains, guided by mobile apps fed with satellite forecasts. Engineers in Addis Ababa's powerhouse balanced turbine speeds with the demands of three capitals, averting blackouts in Khartoum and minimizing salinization risks in the Nile Delta. Power lines hummed with electricity that once flowed unused to the Mediterranean, an anthem of shared progress. The dam's symbolic power grew with each passing year. Marathon races followed the spillway at sunrise. Symphony orchestras performed on barges floating in the reservoir. Schools across Africa used the project as a living laboratory for engineering, diplomacy, and environmental stewardship. Documentaries from Lagos to London told the story of a dam that transcended its concrete and steel, becoming a monument to human ingenuity and regional cooperation. Looking ahead, the benefits continue to unfold. Shared electricity grids promise to link Ethiopia's surplus power to Sudanese factories and Egyptian desalination plants, reducing reliance on costly fossil fuels. Regulated flows open doors to modern irrigation downstream, drip systems, and water-saving technologies that boost yields and conserve precious resources. Revenues from exported electricity fund new water supply networks, improved sanitation, and expanded digital connectivity in remote highland districts. Yet the true legacy of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will be measured not in megawatts alone, but in the bonds it forges among nations. The Nile's waters have nurtured civilizations for millennia, precisely because they were shared equitably. Today, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt face a shared test: whether to hoard or harmonize, to speak in vetoes or in vision. As the sun sets over the Blue Nile Gorge, one truth stands clear: when water unites, it becomes the source of prosperity. When it divides, it fuels conflict. In sharing the Nile, these nations share their future. Meanwhile, Egypt has been expanding its use of the Nile. Massive desert reclamation projects are turning arid land into farmland using Nile water, and the Aswan High Dam continues to regulate the river's flow for power and irrigation. Egypt treats the Nile as its birthright, a river it must control. As part of its plan to feed a growing population and strengthen its economy, Egypt has launched major modern agriculture initiatives in the desert, transforming vast swathes of previously unproductive land into fertile fields. This ambitious program, relying heavily on Nile water, is designed to increase Egypt's agricultural output. The government is building new cities and farming zones in previously arid areas, all while harnessing the Nile's waters for irrigation. Egypt's agricultural transformation is one of its largest and most significant projects, aimed at boosting food security, creating jobs, and sustaining its economy. Funny enough, while Egypt pushes forward with its own modern farming and water projects, it fiercely denies Ethiopia the right to build its own dam on the Nile, despite the fact that the river originates in Ethiopia. Egypt has long argued that the dam threatens its own water security, but the irony is hard to ignore. Egypt can build a modern farm and a massive dam to secure its future, but it insists Ethiopia cannot do the same for its own people. At the same time, Ethiopia, the very source of most of the Nile's waters, embarked on its most ambitious project in modern history, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. GERD, as it's called, began construction in 2011. The initial cost of the dam was estimated to be around $4.8 billion USD, a staggering amount for a country with limited resources, but this was not a project funded by foreign aid or loans. It was financed through Ethiopian bonds, a symbol of national pride and self-reliance. Civil servants, farmers, students, and business owners contributed to the effort, united by the hope that this dam would power Ethiopia's future. The dam rises from the rugged terrain near the Sudanese border. Nearly 2 kilometers long and over 140 meters tall, GERD will generate more than 6,000 megawatts of electricity. That's more than doubling Ethiopia's current capacity, bringing power to over 60 million people who live in darkness and enabling regional power exports to Sudan, Kenya, Djibouti, and beyond. This energy will not only light homes, it will power factories, schools, and businesses. GERD has the potential to transform the industrial base of East Africa, attracting investment, enabling manufacturing, and modernizing agriculture. It promises a new era of economic integration where countries trade electricity, not blame, and prosperity is shared. While the initial cost was a hefty $4.8 billion USD, the current value of GERD has grown far beyond its construction price. When considering its long-term benefits, in terms of electricity generation, regional cooperation, and industrial growth, the dam's strategic value is estimated at $60 billion USD or more over its lifetime. The energy it will supply can fuel decades of development across Ethiopia and its neighbors, lifting millions out of poverty and contributing to Africa's broader economic rise. But not everyone welcomed Ethiopia's ambition. Egypt responded with alarm. For decades, treaties dating back to colonial times had granted it near total control over the Nile's flow, treaties that never included Ethiopia. Now, as Ethiopia began filling the GERD reservoir, Egypt called it a threat to its water security, to its future. Sudan, caught in the middle, expressed both interest and concern, hopeful for cheaper energy and better flood control, yet wary of what might happen without coordination. And then came a surprising voice from close to home. Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki made headlines with a remarkable statement about the GERD. In a televised interview, he dismissed the project as unnecessary for Ethiopia, claiming that the dam would not benefit the country as much as it might think. His comments went even further, with Afwerki suggesting that Ethiopia could manage its energy needs without the dam, undermining the significance of such a massive national project. Funny enough, Afwerki's words only highlighted his ignorance of Ethiopia's power needs and its role in the Nile River basin. The reality is that Eritrea and Ethiopia share a long and complicated history, yet Afwerki's dismissive attitude toward the GERD reflected a deep misunderstanding of the region's energy needs and the dam's importance for Ethiopia's economic and industrial future. It seemed almost as if Afwerki had conveniently forgotten the years of conflict and tension between the two nations. Or worse, he was overlooking the broader regional benefits of the dam. And beyond the region, the rhetoric escalated further. In October 2020, U.S. President Donald Trump, during a phone call with Sudanese and Israeli leaders, made an extraordinary statement. He said Egypt might blow up that dam, adding, "They have to do something." These words, spoken by the leader of a global superpower, echoed around the world. Ethiopia condemned the comments immediately, calling them reckless and inflammatory, a dangerous endorsement of violence over diplomacy. But Ethiopia kept building. By 2021, the first phase of filling was complete. By 2022, turbines began to spin, and by 2025, GERD stood tall, already supplying electricity to parts of Ethiopia long neglected. It became a monument not only to engineering, but to perseverance, built with national sweat under international pressure. Yet tensions remain. Despite years of negotiations, no final binding agreement has been signed. Egypt demands legal guarantees. Ethiopia asserts its sovereign right to use its own waters. Sudan remains cautious. Trust is fragile. Cooperation is difficult. The Nile still flows, but so do suspicions. In the end, GERD is more than concrete. And water, it is a symbol, to some of hope, to others of fear. But it is real, visible, working. And its story is still being written, not just in policy rooms or treaties, but in the lives of millions whose futures are tied to the river that has nourished civilizations for thousands of years. The question is no longer whether the dam will rise. It has. The question is whether the region will rise with it, to share power, build industry, and shape a future driven not by conflict, but by cooperation. As the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam stands poised to transform Ethiopia's energy landscape, its ripple effects extend beyond borders. While President Isaias Afwerki has expressed skepticism, the dam's potential benefits, such as improved electricity access and economic cooperation, offer Eritrea a chance to reconsider its position. Engaging in regional collaboration could pave the way for shared prosperity and stability in the Horn of Africa. What are your thoughts on the GERD's impact on Eritrea and the broader region? Share your perspectives in the comments below. For more in-depth analyses and updates on this topic, don't forget to subscribe and stay informed.